All right, we're going to get right back into our speaking program. And to introduce our next speaker is Kim Ernzen, who leads our Navy programs at Raytheon. Kim has the entire Navy portfolio for the company. And I'd like, Kim, there we are right there. Come on up, Kim. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Tim. And yes, we are in round two, so I know that myself and the next speaker are the only thing that stands between us and lunch and some more mingling, so we'll try to be brief. But I would like to take a minute again to welcome and acknowledge the distinguished speakers that we have had here this morning already, as well as those that travel from far away to come attend this. I know for myself, living on the other side of the country in a very dry climate known as Tucson, this has become a must-do on many of our calendars, just because of the caliber of the people it brings together, both large businesses, small businesses, all of the VIP guests, and the distinguished speakers that we have had, to include Congress and the military. It truly is an honor to be a part of this. We all come from different backgrounds, but at the end of the day, we all have the same objective, and that is to ensure that our warfighters have the very best. As you heard, I get the privilege of leading the Raytheon Naval Power Strategic Business Unit. In that portfolio are many of the marquee programs we all have come to know and love as defenders of our democracy and for our Navy. One of them was mentioned here this morning, the Tomahawk missile, as well as other things such as the Mark 54 lightweight torpedo, the SPY-6 family of radars, and the next generation jammer that is soon to be entering service. So we have a great portfolio, and those are just a few of the examples. And at Raytheon, we know that it is critical that our nation's warfighters depend on the quality of our products. In many cases, they have to work right the first time, every time. And we go through a very onerous process to ensure that the quality is there and that it will meet the performance. And I know that our next keynote speaker shares that imperative and leads a critical component of the Department of Defense, where the slogan is, "Weapons that work faster." The Honorable Nickolas H. Guertin was sworn in as Director, Operational Test and Evaluation in 2021. He serves as the Senior Advisor to the Secretary of Defense on operational and live-fire test and evaluation of the Department of Defense's weapon systems. Mr. Guertin has an extensive 4-decade combined military and civilian career in submarine operations, ship construction and maintenance, development and testing of weapons, sensors, combat management products, including the improvement of systems engineering and defense acquisition. With that, please help me welcome Mr. Guertin to the stage.
Thank you, Kim. I was here last year. I'm not a third-timer yet, so the secretary's got me by one of those. And it is really a privilege and a pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for inviting me. Also, I had a chance to run into colleagues and friends from several projects, some really far in the past, but and I've met some new partners for the future, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work in this area. As many of you know, I'm in the process of being confirmed to be the next Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, and Acquisition, a job I would crawl over broken glass to get, but I'm not there yet. So unfortunately, I have to limit my remarks today to the things that are going on in my current role, which is the best job I've ever had, Director for Operational Test and Evaluation. It's a great gig. We report independently to the Secretary of Defense and to Congress about how our weapon systems are working, how they were going to be working in an operational context, and we make sure that the tests are adequate, the analysis is fair, and we find the truth. That does put us in the position of occasionally giving bad news to good people, but it's nothing personal, strictly business. Last year, when I talked to this group, we had just published a strategy update for DOT&E. I was very happy about that, and I talked you through its 5 pillars and its operating principles. But this year, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into what we've been doing since then, but not into the details, more about the process. How do you do this sort of thing in a place, a big organization like the Pentagon, to drive lasting change? So I had some ideas coming into this position about what is a compelling case that the team could appreciate, believe in, and see that the structural, technical, behavioral elements were going to be necessary to changing the culture and changing our outcomes. Specifically, systems that are built to evolve, that are going to be different over time. Incremental, iterative, software intensive, all those things that we're familiar with. Almost all of our weapon systems have software in them somewhere. Almost all. Now, we also do a lot of hardware-related stuff in terms of operational tests of like airplanes and ships and bullets, but a lot of software-related things that are going to be changing over time. And that's kind of a new practice for DOT&E. In the past, we've been a very kind of waterfall, big V-oriented sort of shop. Not that we haven't done operational tests on things that are changing over time, but we want to embrace that as a preferred set of practices. So that's a lot for that organization to take in, and formulating a strategy around that was important, but a strategy by itself doesn't get you all the way there. A lot of moving parts, a lot of stakeholder organizations around DOT&E that we were going to have to also pull in. And the reason I want to talk to you about this today is because I think it's a good object lesson in how it might impact your organizations. So that's my bottom line up front. I'm going to tell you about this experience and how it might apply to you in the future. So those of you who've heard or seen my background know that this is not my first time to this kind of rodeo. I'm comfortable enough with the idea of being a change agent. I feel qualified to share some of those insights and what it takes to pull this sort of thing off. When I was getting interviewed to be the director for OT&E, I made it clear that test and evaluation was not the only part of my background, certainly an important part, but if they were looking for somebody that had demonstrated success in implementing change management strategies, then I was a good fit, and so far it has worked out. So in brief, some of the things that really helped inform where I am today and the progress we're making. In the mid-90s, I worked actually here in Newport, integrating a new sonar system onto the Trident submarine fleet. That doesn't sound so hard, right? But there was some cultural backlash, and working through all that was a real object lesson in it's not just about the technology or the ROI, it's about the people. And then later on, working in the program office in the DC area, that's when we started using commercial tools and COTS hardware to build sonar systems in a completely different way in order to get more iterative and incremental capability change to the fleet, because we really needed it. Then taking those object lessons and making them to apply to kind of a sister project, the combat control system on submarines, where we really stretched the envelope of what it meant to have an open architecture, how to do competitive alternatives, how to break vendor lock, for instance, and how to move that iterative incremental approach into a different area. With that success under my belt, I was pulled over into PEO IWS, Integrated Warfare Systems, to be the lead for the Naval Open Architecture effort, and that's enterprise-wide across I used to joke, the 5 navies of the Navy. It would include the Marine Corps, by the way. That's why it was the Naval Enterprise Open Architecture team. That caught a lot of attention, including at OSD, when they were standing up the Better Buying Power initiative, and I got folded into the Promote Real Competition pillar, and that's where we kind of retitled open architecture, Naval Open Architecture, and a modular open systems approach. It's all the same thing, just a slightly different backdrop. But applying those practices across the DoD, and now you see these big contracts coming out, and even the smaller ones, you'll see the open architecture is a going-in position. It's what the government is looking for when it comes to these complex weapons and military systems. So we made an impact. And now, at DOT&E, we're always been what we've hearkened ourselves as the key to weapons that work. And my twist on that is, okay, but weapons that work faster. So like I said, technology is a fraction of the problem. Culture eats strategy for lunch. Culture is changed through changing behavior. And here comes the really exciting part. How do you change behavior? Policy and practice. Now that doesn't sound so exciting, right? But you don't get to the big change in the behavior modalities for a large organization unless you go after those things as if they matter a lot, at least as high as the business models and the technology architectures. So the other thing that we're doing in DID23 is kind of embracing the truth of where we are. A lot of our mission systems are software reliant. They're trying to establish some sort of rubric of incremental change. Sometimes they're doing it on top of systems that have been around for a long time. Oh, we can do Agile now. Ugh. You know, trying to do Agile on top of an older system that wasn't built for iterative and incremental change sometimes leads to disappointing results, if not actually broken promises. So as we used to say at the Software Engineering Institute, re-architecting once in a while is good for the soul. So it's just something for us to keep in mind as we think about the technology piece of transformative change. Sometimes you have to take a hard look at the way you're doing the work in order to get to different outcomes. Back to the Naval Open Architecture effort for a moment. I was fortunate enough to get a really great handoff from two very strong leaders that had built a great internal team to the organization. But the other stakeholders, if you will, the other PEOs and SysComs would send representatives to our naval enterprise team. And I'll tell you, when I first took that job, it was like a sack of wet cats. Everybody saying every reason why, oh, we can't do that open architecture thing here, you don't understand. Well, that's when I had to like take a step back, appreciate this is a people problem, be humble, be willing to listen, but also if you got a good value proposition and a good approach to a business model, then help people along, help people see themselves in that future. So as we worked through that and opened ourselves up to input, to criticism, embraced it, showed that their opinions mattered, that sack of wet cats started to turn into a cohesive team. And later on, when I was briefing Assistant Secretary Stackley, who is a great mentor that really drove a lot of that demand signal for doing business in a different way. We were doing these quarterly reports to Congress on open architecture. Actually, he wrote the language when he was in the Senate staff, that then when he was over at Navy, he's like, okay, where's that quarterly report? And he would sign them out on behalf of the Secretary. But so it was kind of his report. But after handing him quarterly reports of what everybody was saying they were doing, all kind of hickledy-pickledy approaches, he said, look, I want a plan, and then I want you to show me progress to the plan. It was like somebody taking a giant ship's bell and just whacking it right over my head. So now that I had formed a more coherent team, willing to work together, willing to take each other's inputs, I went back to them and said, hey, the Secretary is looking for a comprehensive plan that we could apply metrics to and show results. And that actually worked. And it was really had a big impact on how we were doing that approach and really informed that where the Navy would be and why it would catch attention at OSD and help drive it into even a bigger transformation that we had initially seen. But going back to this notion of culture eats strategy for lunch, I'm an engineer. I'm not a behavioral scientist. But realizing that was a weakness in our approach, we needed to better understand what it takes to move people in a different direction. So we even went so far as to add a psychologist to our team. We embraced what we didn't know, which in my current business, embrace the red, right? This is what we found about your thing, sorry, and help people see their way to a better future. So listening to stakeholder perspectives, understanding how their challenges fit into the broader context, building that solid team was our primary way by which we were successful. Back to seeing people seeing themselves in their future when they're in an environment of change. So that's not sugarcoating the story. That's not saying, oh, everything is going to be better. Sometimes it's not going to be better. A quick sidebar, when we made that transition from mil-spec technology for sonar into using commodity electronics, there is a whole section of people whose job it was to do the logistics around those mil-spec parts. They suddenly were in the buggy whip industry. We stepped away from a lot of that. Not all right away, but we had to find a way that people would see themselves in this future that we were crafting. That has been instructive, but now let me get a little bit more into where we are with DID23 and our strategy, and foreshadow a little bit the implementation plan. So that progress to the plan thing, you know, okay, so we got a strategy, but what are the metrics? What are the measures? How are we going to show that we're making progress? So DID23 did that. So I came in with some ideas, but I was willing to listen to what people's positions were, how they were living, and how to make the ideas I had both be blended by their points of view, but also have my position impact how they were thinking about the problem at hand. Part of being humble. So, but looking inside ourselves to understand where we were, but looking externally to see what was going on around us, and seeing clearly what that is, and then embracing what that must mean to the way we do our business. Evolving best practices in the private sector, learning from programs that are driving innovation into their products, and how do we become a part of that fast-moving train. So it's not just the outcome, though, but it's the tools and methods used to build those products. All those things are in motion, right? What's the coin of the realm today in software-intensive systems? Oh, Agile, DevSecOps, all that stuff. Well, is that what we're going to be seeing in 10 years? Probably have a different name by then, right? The methods by which we organize, the tools we use to approach the job, the architectures we use to create the actual product, all of those things are in motion, some faster than others. So we in DID23 needed to appreciate that we were living in a changing world, and there were multiple layers to this changing environment. So, as a part of creating that strategy I talked to you about last year, we set up a set of pillars and a set of activities. But that by itself does not get you measures, metrics, and some way of keeping track with the feedback loop. So that's what we built into this implementation plan. So setting up the stage for that, it was fortunate, again, that the existing DID23 staff knew that the world was changing around them, and were looking forward to having somebody, a confirmed leader in that position to help them figure out how to engage that going forward. Now, it didn't all go smoothly. I'm not going to tell you it was all roses and apple pie, but at least they appreciated that I wasn't talking about something that they'd never heard before or didn't come to appreciate. Getting into the details of how to make it work in their practice was really the hard part. Also, some structural things had happened upon my arrival that is really not new. I might have talked about it last year, but Dr. Raymond O'Toole, my principal deputy, had reorganized the office when he was the acting director. Was a fantastic architectural shift and a much needed change, where we folded live fire test and evaluation from an independent entity into a common equity across air warfare, naval warfare, land warfare, and net-centric in space. But then created, out of that one he took away, created a new one, strategic initiatives, policies, and emerging technologies. So Dr. Sandra Hobson is my director for that, and that's the policy shop, right? But it's also the emerging technology shop. Those different layers of movement I was talking about, how does that get incorporated into the practice of operational test? A lot of it depends on which programs we're looking at, but at least we're grappling with the truth of the matter where we are today. But she also manages some of the field activities we have, like the Center for Countermeasures, the Test and Evaluation Threat Resource Activity, or TETRA, and the Joint Test and Evaluation Activity, among others. So we keep her busy. There were two other initiatives that was beneficial to this initiative, and that is my predecessor, Bob Beeler, had the had internally developed a science and technology strategy. That was a good thing to launch from. And also he had commissioned the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Math to perform a study on test and evaluation ranges. Those two were very instructive and also really called out what were the big things we needed to do differently. So the last thing I want to mention in that regard is those are not the only, we also have other external drivers of the need to do things differently. That is, the programs we're doing oversight on. The way the B-21 program is doing their mission system architectures and flight avionics is completely different than how, say, F-18 upgrades are going on. So keeping an eye on those different technologies, those different systems, those different initiatives, and figuring out how we play into it has been very helpful, actually, in determining what are the things that we're going to do differently that will have the biggest impact. So we don't want to push back on organizations bringing those new modalities to us. We want to figure out how we're going to incorporate that into our practice. But we're going to stand firm on tests that are comprehensive, or not comprehensive, but at least sufficient, adequate, so that we can determine whether or not the outcome of the efforts and their subsequent incremental capability improvements are going to be operationally suitable, effective, survivable, and where needed, lethal. Those are the 4 levers I get to pull when we do our reports. All right. And the last thing I want to say about that is that, you know, for anybody who's, you know, Secretary Del Toro, it looked like he had just read a press article that got under his skin a little bit. And every once in a while we see that too. But we help every program we touch to make sure they have adequate tests and their outcomes are the characterization of how these programs or projects are actually going to be used in the field. That is informing the warfighter as well as Congress how well these things work and how effective the money is being spent. Okay, so we published the strategy, and like I used to say back in the days when we had whiteboards instead of teams, the first person to the whiteboard wins. That is the point of departure of the conversation. Now we're thinking about, you know, what are those measures, what are our feedback loops, and then and how to be humble about it, because this has been a very humbling experience. Lots of concerned professionals outside of DOT&E, you know, across the services. My partners up and down the hall at the Undersecretary of Research and Engineering and Acquisition and Sustainment. And then, and those are the people that we use to help craft the strategy. And we had a going in position. We opened up comments and review process to those entities, and but then I signed it out. Now this implementation plan, I wanted to be bigger than my signature. I wanted to have more partners in. And the old saying, what's interesting, my boss is fascinating to me. So with this implementation plan, I've got both undersecretaries for RNA and ANS, as well as the 3 service secretaries endorsing this implementation plan. By the way, both of which you'll find on the DOT&E website. So now we broadened out our community even more to bring in other stakeholders that would inform how well this practice of operational test is progressing. The intelligence community, joint staff, and combatant commanders, among others, really helped us better inform whether or not the outcome of our work was going to have a value-added impact to the products that they end up using. So that sausage making was a tough pull. Lots of thoughtful inputs and some energetic pushback. And so as we're grinding through that, there's a lot of frustration on my team. It's like, oh, we're getting all this, what are we going to do about all this feedback? Like, look, if we weren't getting that pushback, it would mean they wouldn't think that the effort was going to have value or going to have an outcome or going to impact their lives. That we were getting that pushback meant that it was probably going to have an impact in their lives, and they were concerned about it from them personally. How is it affecting me? And so part of that pushback was getting around the normal reactions of, hey, what are you trying to fix? There's nothing wrong here. There's nothing wrong with me. You're outside your swim lane. You're trying to take over other responsibilities. You know, you're breaching the limits of your authority. You got all that stuff. But we worked through it all. Those are natural reactions and were a necessary part of the work of coming to consensus. Consensus does not mean agreement. And I contend that consensus is at the heart of leadership. That's when you're really working with people, figuring out the best mix for how to go forward in an effective way where you're bringing the larger team together. But getting the endorsements from those 5 leaders turned out to be especially powerful. Now, but that's not the end of the story, though. Oh, by the way, if there was a medal specifically for managing the minefield of the Pentagon bureaucracy, my team would have earned it. All right, so the other thing that the I-Plan put in place was the need for a chartered organization that was going to be that feedback loop. How are we progressing? Are we measuring the right things? Revisiting what's happening and figuring out what to do differently as we proceed forward. And not on a day-by-day basis, but more on a longer-term basis, like quarterly. We asked the Joint Staff to co-chair this team so that the efforts of the initiative would be informed by operational imperatives. That, by the way, was not an easy feat to pull off either, because it's kind of like, whoa, operational test and evaluation and the Joint Staff, how do those things go together? You know, like peanut butter and chocolate. So we're just launching into that and standing up the multiple disciplinary teams that will be necessary to see this to fruition. So change is challenging. Being inclusive, having humility, being able to listen up to the, and every once in a while, though, you run into a point where you're like, all right, we've gotten your input, you know, thanks for your interest in national security, but, you know, there's some things you need to stand tall on, but very, very rarely, most of the time, just listening to others, taking in their input, taking advantage of their innovation, their thoughts, even their criticisms, in order to build a better future. So, in our case, it's DOT&E's obligation to the warfighter to convey to them, with confidence, how their equipment will actually perform when they plan and execute their missions, and to continue to uphold that commitment despite the challenges that lie ahead, or maybe even informed by the challenges that lie ahead. So, as I said, you can get either of those documents on the DOT&E website, and with that, I'm open to your questions. Dennis.
Welcome back to Newport, sir.
Thank you.
As you know, government contracting continues to be very slow. And there were some things done by Hondo Gertz. He pushed OTAs a little bit. That helped a little bit, but it's become kind of bureaucratized, and it's still very slow. Just wondering what advice you would have for the next person to hold the seat of ASN RDA, whomever that might be, God willing, but about what we could do to speed up contracting.
So I'm a little reticent to lean too deeply into that. I have, in my current role, I have no authorities over Navy. I have personal opinions, right? I'm going to demur a little bit. I'm sorry. I apologize for seeming like a wuss here, but there are other dynamics at play. And I hope that doesn't shut down other questions. So please, if you got a question, go ahead and hit me with it. And if I decide I'm only going to answer it so much, just consider that part of the course. I'm excited about some of the work that's going on in RDA staff currently, looking at things like budget modeling and contracting initiatives that are in a nascent state, and I've been briefed out on some of those. The challenges associated with rapid contracting also needs to be informed by the due diligence requirements of the federal government. So we're only going to be able to get so fast. One of the other things that I'll tell you that from my experience working on the open architecture initiatives is that, and I'm somewhat guilty of this, is that understanding how to invoke competitive alternatives is informed by the government's access to intellectual property. We have to have a more nuanced approach, I think, to how we, and I think we actually have evolved into a more nuanced approach to where industry does investments, like really, no kidding, industry investments where they create some intellectual property that is wonderful and unique and novel, and we need it a lot, and we need to, just write some checks and buy it. But we need to do that in the context of how do we replace it? What's that kind of open architecture boundary, if you will? So if we understand that on both government and industry teams, when you invest, when you create something new and novel on your own nickel, we're not going to say, okay, now surrender all your IP just because we're the 900-pound gorilla. On the other hand, when the government does pay for the work, there's some deliverables we're going to want, and that's just, if you didn't like the terms of the contract, you should have found a different business partner. So you need to stand tall and stay firm on what the government's responsibilities are, but also value industry innovations, but not do it in such a way that locks us in a way that is not valuable to the taxpayer writ large, which includes the people doing the investment. It's probably not a great answer, but that's what I got. Another question? Go ahead.
So, Kimber here. I manufacture capacitors. We sell to lots of primes and tier two. And we also found ourselves recently working more and more with some venture capital backed defense contractors that have a really seemingly fast to fail mentality.
Mm-hmm.
We're small, we consider ourselves really agile, and they're way faster than we can, trying to move as fast as we can. Just wondering if you see any of that trend, the tech investment type of more tech money moving into the defense sector versus the traditional.
Yeah, again, from an operational test and evaluation perspective, there's only so much of that I see in my current role. The only thing I would want to kind of add on to that is that if you're going to engage with an investor that's looking for a different value proposition, make sure you're still responsive to your customers. You're under contract for a product with the quality attributes and all the other things. The defense industry is not the commercial industry. We do things that you just aren't going to do out of stuff that you buy at Best Buy. It's and we do ask for a different level of performance. We do ask for a different level of transparency. Now, the operational test side, through the lens of suitability, right? Is it repairable? Can a high school graduate understand how to use it? All the other things necessary in order to have an effective deployed weapon system. It's a different business, and we want to be able to use commercial technologies as much and as often as that has value to us. But we're not a commercial enterprise, and so it's a different and importantly different business model.
Hey, sir, thank you for your remarks this morning. My first acquisition job was in the T&E group at the Columbia Test program. And one of the interesting things was the temp there has operational testing done in a virtual environment using modeling and simulation. I just wanted to hear if you had any thoughts about where the future of that is going, to leverage the efficiencies and maybe cost savings using those environments versus in-water testing. Thank you.
Oh, Captain, great question. So first thing I'll start out with is we will have to use modeling and simulation for testing our weapon systems more and more because the warfighting environment is more and more complicated. For instance, F-35. We're building it to be able to do certain things in certain warfare arenas. When we take it out to our test ranges, and we've got these great test ranges at places like Nevada Test and Training Range, Point Mugu, and others, well, we're only going to be able to present so many of the actual signals and energetics as a part of doing that operational test. So we built the joint simulation environment. That's its own long, tragic story. I won't bore you with it, except that, hey, we're almost done. And we finally built, and I said we, actually Navy, our folks at Pax River built the joint simulation environment that actually has kind of an open architecture plug-in to it that is the actual aircraft. And for the specific example of F-35, it's called F-35 in a box. But it's basically a virtualized instantiation of the software it takes to fly the jet. And you stick this thing in the middle, and all around it is the world. And that's contextual to the operation of a fighter jet, a stealth fighter jet. So with that then, we're able to present lots of different kinds of signals, lots of different enemy engagements, and we have multiple players, red and blue, and real throaty operational environment. And we could see whether or not this thing is going to meet muster for its, well, the fleet loves it. Top Gun was out there, and it's the best training I've ever had. It's the first time I died. Kind of thing. They were really excited about it. I said, well, you're excited about it because we went through the extra effort, here comes the punchline, to validate and verify that the simulation reflected the actual physics. That is not easy. It's not cheap. It takes a long time. So modeling and simulation has to be a part of our future, but don't go after it for cost savings. Go after it for operational excellence. And if you squeeze a couple of nickels out of it, fine. But that's not the reason to use modeling and simulation. We just find ourselves in a more complicated world that to really do test and evaluation, to see the operational impact of these much more complicated systems, we're going to have to do that modeling and simulation, but it has to be validated and verified by an accreditor for it to be believed when it comes to my team. One little twist to that, some areas more than others. When it comes to electromagnetic spectrum operations, there are some things, once you let a certain waveform or something like that out into the world, whoop, that's it, everyone knows about it. Some things you probably won't use until you actually need it. And those really have to be particularly careful about how they're validated and verified, because the only time it's going to get used is when lives are on the line. Sir.
Thank you, sir, for making the time. Much appreciated. I'm with a little company here in Rhode Island called American Ecotech, and as you can tell, I'm an East Providence native, as you can tell from my accent. And we actually work in the space of environmental technology, specifically measuring what's in the air, which obviously has been an interesting time over the last few years. We've been fortunate enough, I think all modesty aside, we're a little company here based in Rhode Island, but I think we are the best at what we do across the country. And we've been very successful within the Air Force at adapting some of our commercial technology for Air Force needs. In particular, for example, we developed an air monitor that can assess the impacts of gases and particulate in the air and look at corrosion impacts. So in the Air Force, we've had a great deal of success, but in the Navy, we feel that it's a bit like a club where if you're in the club, it's great, but if you're outside a small business like us, trying to find the key to get in fact, just trying to find the doorway is very difficult. So I'm just interested to hear your comments on that, just from a small business perspective.
So, the secretary who was just here earlier was a small business owner. It wasn't a technology company, it was more of a services company. Actually, I was one of their customers when I was a Navy civilian. And as the past director for transformation, is a really cool title, when I was at DAS&RD T&E, was a big small business advocate. So there is an appetite there. How it's flowing into your particular problem set and which club member you need to talk to. Like I said, there's 5 navies in the Navy. If you're working on the submarine Navy, maybe you try like the surface or the air Navy, see if you get different penetration. Success breeds success, so getting that start is really important. And if there's something we can do to help you with that, please let us know.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right. Looks like I'm getting the hook, which means that I successfully filled up the time. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Mr. Guertin, for the great commentary. And with that, we are going to take about a 30-minute break, give everybody time to go down to the show floor, do some more mingling and networking, and then about 11:30 you'll start hearing chimes for folks. Am I saying this right? No, Tim's giving me the thumbs up, which is good because we're off script at this point now. But you'll start hearing the bell, which will signal for everybody to start lining up for lunch. And so we'll ask everybody to get their lunch and then come back in here. And as everybody is taking their seats and starting, we will bring up the lunchtime speaker, which is going to be Admiral Lisa Franchetti. So looking forward to our lunch engagement. So with that, please enjoy the break, and we'll see you here shortly.